Hello and welcome to another video from fantasyfootballscout.co.uk. My name is David and today we are continuing in our FPL team reveal series where we quiz the biggest and brightest minds in FPL to find out who is in their first draft ahead of the 23-24 campaign. We've had the game for coming up on 10 days now. We've had plenty of time to tinker around with our squads, and now is the opportunity to find out where the initial dust has settled. And I'm very, very pleased today to be joined by Neale Rigg, who is, of course, the editor of the site. You may know him as Sconto Rigger on Twitter. You may also know him as the best guesser of most Premier League teams from one week to the other, because, of course, he is also of team news fame as well. I'll try and spare your blushes by limiting my introduction there for you, Neale. It's nice to have you here. How are you doing?
I'm all right, yeah. Thanks very much. Yeah, emphasis on most there, but we exclude Man City from that collection. But yeah, if you don't know me already, yeah, I'm the editor of Scout, and you probably see my writing more than my face because I think it's just a team news video that I appear on most weeks throughout the season. But I'm lending my ugly mug to this as well. My team reveal. I'm doing all right. Yeah, I'm doing not too bad. It's been nice to have the weekends back this summer because we work those throughout the season. And to sort of go more in depth into articles as well, you're kind of up against the clock sometimes during the week when the season's underway. But over the summer, you get a little bit more time to go deeper into certain subject matters. Writing about the promoted teams and sort of members comparisons. So it's my favourite time of the year for writing because you can tackle a wider range of subjects rather than the weekly picks and differentials and things like that. So yeah, I'm enjoying it at the moment.
Yeah, I have to say, I share your enthusiasm, actually. Those of you who are sort of like very niche Fantasy Football Scout editorial fans will know that, of course, me and Neale used to do a lot of this content together, and it really was so much fun because that's the time of the season when we get to discover new people. And, of course, the man behind me, Mr. John Lundstrom himself, was one of our discoveries, as was Aaron Wan-Bissaka as well. And we discovered that, of course, using the preseason minute spreadsheet, which is, of course, a benefit of membership as well. Why don't you tell us a bit about what it's like populating that spreadsheet? In many ways I feel bad because I made you do that back in the day, and here you are, a slave to the fact that actually we found some good information there. You're still slaving away at that preseason minute spreadsheet. What's it like?
Yeah, it's updated at as we speak. I've just filled in Man United's minutes from yesterday, and it was Brentford as well. They were playing Bournemouth. So this, yeah, if you're not aware of it, it's team by team, and it lists all the players. I think not just priced up by FPL, but academy products and second string players who are playing in preseason as well, and gives you a game by game overview of how many minutes each player has played. So at this time of the year, it's perhaps less important because some players haven't even returned to training yet from the internationals who were given a bit extra time off. But gradually, as the summer goes on, it is very useful because you get to see who is sort of match sharp, who's played the most over the summer, which budget assets, I suppose, are in with a chance of Gameweek 1 appearances. And that's, as you say, Lundstrom, that's how he came about because he was peripheral, wasn't he, in the Sheffield United promotion winning campaign? I think he played like 5 games or something in the second tier. Wasn't even mentioned in the promoted articles that we did with Sheffield United fans. Everyone thought he would either be like backup or sent out on loan or something like that. But we saw throughout that summer him racking up the minutes in pre-season, and it became apparent quite quickly that he was going to be starting, and the rest is history. So there's a few players we'd have an eye on this summer. I think particularly in the budget brackets in defence, midfield, and up front, because at first glance, I think midfielders and forwards especially, there's really nothing there. But it happens every year where there's someone just comes out of the pack and starts to accumulate minutes. It can be after a loan move or a transfer elsewhere, but Pereira was an example of that last season. But it's a handy at a glance guide for picking out players like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, it is one of the many facets of Fantasy Football Scout membership, which you haven't already sorted that for the season. Now is the time, of course, to do that. You can save up to 30% on those preseason prices. The preseason minute spreadsheet, which we've talked about in great detail there, is one of those things where you get points projections, transfer planners, drafts from the best fantasy managers in the world as well, including 3 former winners. The most recent one as well, Ali, finished 215th in his season before winning it. So he especially knows what he's talking about, and you'll get plenty of advice from him. All sorts of tools as well, in terms of of comparisons, comparison tools, tables, all sorts of stuff for you to interact with and find out the answers to your questions, and the season ticket as well. And some of the stuff that Neale and Tom and Mark work on in the editorial department is obviously exclusive to members as well, so you'll be able to get full access to all of Neale's thoughts rather than just a select amount of his thoughts, which is always better, especially in a context surrounding who's the best player to own, who's the best player in 150-50 to the next. So make sure you've sorted that as well. Now, before we jump into your team, Neale, I just want to talk to you about team news as well, because, of course, that is perhaps what you are renowned for the most. That's something you've been doing ever since you joined Scout about 6 years ago now. Can you tell us what we can expect from you when the season really starts to get underway, for anybody out there who's not really aware, just how much time, effort and thought goes into looking at every Premier League team and working out who you think is most likely to play from one week to the next?
Yeah, it is. It is a bit of an endeavour. It takes it most of my Friday and a lot of Thursday as well. So if you're not aware, it's a tab we've got on the site. It's our most visited page. Actually, it's hugely popular. Even at this time of year, strangely enough, people are still going to that page. I think to see what who's going to start in Gameweek 1, I guess. But I think we updated provisionally after a game week's just finished, so say Monday, Tuesday. But it gets finalised on a Thursday and Friday after the press conferences. So I will be listening to all 20 where they're available. Where not, I'll be reading transcripts and things like that for key quotes from managers. I guess my role is, I wouldn't be as big-headed to say as I know exactly what's going to happen in all 20 teams. I think my job is to almost accumulate thought on what the consensus opinion is. So I will flock to fans forums and local newspapers as well, to sort of get the gen on who they think might be coming into the team, or who's coming back from injury, things like that. Game week 1 actually the printed lineups are slightly easier to predict because we have seen generally the strongest team feature in that last friendly. That tends to be what teams do. It's not always the case, but real hard work becomes later in the season when the rotation's starting to happen and European football kicks in and things like that. But it's a lot of effort. It's enjoyable though. It's nice when things go right, and I wouldn't profess to be an expert on all 20 teams, but it's I think the hard work you put in tends to get reflected in the results. Most of the time, like someone tracked our predicted lineups last season, and they were like ahead of other people who were doing it, which it sounds like a bit of a brag, but I think it's just a reflection of that you need to put time into it. I think it's something you can't really do as a throwaway thing. You need to accumulate thought and opinion on the matter and recognize patterns as well. I think after 5 years of doing it, for example, Brentford. So just an example of what Brentford do when they're playing a bigger team. They tend to go 3-5-2. When they're playing an easier team, it's 4-3-3. So it's little nuggets like that, like you pick up over the years. All forms port your thought, but it's hard and it can lead to long hours. But it's probably the most favorite part of the job. Actually, it's nice, going deep down and trying to second guess these blasted managers.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, you seem afraid to brag about it too much, or I might just take it that extra mile just for you. I mean, yeah, it's that extra time that you put into it, and it's the advantage of doing it as a full-time job, which other places don't really have the opportunity to do that. Even when you look at say, BBC and Sky, for example, they don't necessarily have someone who's like dedicated specifically to this task. And again, just speaking from personal experience, when me and Neale used to work together, a Friday I would barely hear from him because he was just so buried in all of that stuff. And and it's because it's spotting those patterns that people underappreciate. I think how much time you have to put into just going back over so many other matches. I mean, Man City again is another really challenging one because they just play in so many competitions. There's so many different iterations to work through, and that's one of the other many benefits of using Fantasy Football Scout content, because you are getting direct access to a guy whose literal day job, 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, or probably more than 8 hours a day, spotting these patterns in the teams. So yeah, there we are. I've completed the brag for you, Neil, so you don't have to sound too up yourself.
Thanks
so
very much.
there we are. Well, with that out of the way, let's jump into specifically your team, because of course, the team news sometimes can help influence some of your picks, for example. And I suppose one place we should start, actually, and you've already mentioned Brentford, is how you've decided to cover them and how you've decided not to cover them in your initial draft, because you are officially the first person to come here without Mbeumo. And Praz had some concerns about Mbeumo, but took him for now. You presumably have some concerns about Mbeumo and feel quite positive by comparison about Visser, who you do have in your team. So let's start there. No Mbeumo, you've got Visser. What was the thinking there?
I think Mbeumo was the better pick.
Oh, really?
So I haven't just done this for the sake of it. I mean, I did like to try and differ from the template somewhat and present a slightly tweaked draft. There's still a lot of template picks in there. Basically, I think what you want from your team is less or as few compromises as possible. So, I don't like coverage as a thing in FPL. Trying to match a more expensive assets returns with a cheaper counterpart. I think it can lead to a sort of wishy-washy 50-50 decisions that and it just doesn't work a lot of the time. With Wissa, that is my one compromise, I think, in this team, and that Mbeumo is probably still my preferred pick, especially since they've changed positions. I did an article on what these two players would have scored last season. I think Mbeumo would have finished in the top 10 midfielders. I think just behind Bruno Fernandes with those adjusted points, you would have getting more for clean sheets and goals, obviously. But I don't think Visser is a bad pick in his own right. And I've seen some teams actually with the Brentford double up. So just start with Visser's plus points. He should, barring any further transfer activity from Brentford, be leading the line for Brentford. We know Ivan Toney suspended till January. And whenever that happened last season, whenever Toney was out, be it through injury or suspension, it was Visser who was leading the line whenever they played 4-3-3. So in that formation, which they play against the weaker teams, it would be Mbeumo on the right, Visser through the middle, and then I think Kevin Schade, or I think Lewis Potter's fit now. He could play there as well. I think Damsgaard even played there on the left. So Visser will be through the middle. Now, Mbeumo has penalties, we think. So that is another thing in his favour. But both of them excelled whenever Toney wasn't there last year. Far be from Toney absence being a hindrance. They sort of came into the home. So over half of Visser's attacking returns last season, he got 11 in total. 6 of them came when Toney was missing, and he only missed 5 games. So he got more in those 5 appearances than he did in the rest of the season. Visser. So his underlying stats went up, as did Mbeumo's. But he's 6 million, so he's $500,000 cheaper. And I think there are fewer picks up top than there are in midfield. There's just a wealth of options in midfield. Like Mbeumo's just one of probably about 10 or 11 midfielders on my watch list, whereas there's certainly fewer in attack. Now I still might go back to Mbeumo, but for the moment, because I like, as we'll come on to in a second Man City representative for their good fixture run, that was the compromise I made by going for Visser up top. And as I say, it still might go back to Mbeumo, but his underlying numbers are pretty good. They weren't as good as Mbeumo's, admittedly, but he had been spending much of the season playing out on the flank or dropping to the bench, Visser, and now he's that leading central figure. And I think he's been as under-talked as Mbeumo's been over-talked. And I think he's one of the sort of standout 6 million forwards, if that's what you want, which is not necessarily what we'll end up with come Gameweek 1. But that's me current thinking anyway.
Yeah, I have to say that the gap in the XT between these two players isn't expected, talked about. Their deltas are totally the opposite of each other, aren't they? Because Mbeumo is in everybody's team. Visser very much being overlooked at the moment, so could very much be a differential. I actually like your thinking in the sense that you want to be able to still cover that Brentford attack, although we don't use the C word, as we've already discussed, too freely. Foden coming in for Mbeumo. I mean, there seems to be a lot of upside there. You are the second person to come to these team reveals with Foden. The other one was Gianni. He made a very strong case for him. Now, one of the things we talked about was rotation, for example. Yeah. And, I think you might be able to perhaps enlighten us just on how City traditionally don't actually rotate as much as people expect at the start of a campaign.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly right. I mean, that's cited as a reason not to go mad on City players, and it's a reason I adhere to most of the year. But Champions League doesn't start until after game week 5, and I think yes, they have the Super Cup. I think that's between game weeks 1 and 2, but that's a glorified exhibition match, really. So looking at last year, when you're just playing one game a week, and not going abroad and juggling Wednesday, Saturday turnarounds, then actually Pep's rotated much less. So last season, for example, I think there was 7 players started the first 4 games, so ever presence. And Nathan Ake would have done the same if he hadn't been injured. So that's like 8 out of 11. If there will be the week-to-week rotation, he does this whenever. There will be, horses for courses selections. If he comes up against a deep back line, he likes, runners from midfield. If he's up against a tougher opponent, he likes that control he's talked about with, Bernardo. So there'll still be those selection changes from week to week. But the core of that team, I think, will remain the same for the first 4 or 5 game weeks. And then once you get into the Champions League, then there's a bit more of a lottery there. And City's fixtures are brilliant. So I'll read them out now. Burnley, Newcastle. Yeah, fair enough, that's tough. But Newcastle did concede 5 to Man City last season, despite their tough defence. Sheffield United, Fulham, West Ham, Nottingham Forest, Wolves. So it's an absolutely brilliant start. And if I guess Foden's a placeholder for the best City midfielder, who I think comes apparent in pre-season. So it could be Mahrez, could be Grealish, could be Bernardo. It could be Alvarez, actually. I mean, the one thing that could happen is I switch Foden and Wissa for Alvarez and Mbeumo. And I would only ever go near Alvarez if De Bruyne is injured, which he is. He's injured at the moment. He did his hamstring in the Champions League final. There's talk that he won't be fit for the start of the season. Now I'll monitor that. If he's anywhere near close, I won't go near Alvarez because I think those two will eat into each other's game time. Alvarez, far be from just being a Haaland reliever up top for minutes, has been used quite a lot by Pep in that De Bruyne position when they come up against the deeper back lines. So that is an option. But Foden, we saw him in the Champions League used in central midfield when he came on the final. They've lost Gundogan now, so they've lost one of those runners from midfield that Pep likes. And I do wonder whether Foden will now be used a bit more through the middle rather than out wide where Grealish is and on the opposite flank where Mahrez and Bernardo have played. Whereas we might see him, barring any further signings, because they've got Kovacic, but I think he'll be more used for the tougher fixtures. I think we might see Foden a bit more central this year. So he's in there as a City placeholder before see any of the pre-season friendlies. But everyone's going to own Haaland come game week 1, and they've got some absolutely brilliant fixtures to start with. So I think he's I think having a second City attacker in there with the obvious risks beyond the Champions League starting is where you could possibly get an edge.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose you've talked about the existing context. The context could get even kinder if we do get confirmation that De Bruyne is out for a longer time. But also there is sort of some transfer swirlings that possible that Bernardo Silva might leave. And, while we probably can't necessarily comment on rumours of that description at the moment, there's still just the possibility that some of those players move on, and that's just fewer players to feed into that rotation machine. So that on top of the preseason should hopefully help us work things out there. And you're absolutely right. I mean, I always use Joe's analogy of sword versus shield. Haaland is the shield. If everybody's got Haaland, how do you actually get green arrows out of a fantastic fixture run with the best attack in the league? Well, you go and get someone else, and you kind of look past the preconceptions. And I think that's probably the best way to describe some of the work that we do at Fantasy Football Scouts sometimes is you get this kind of preconception bandwagon kind of emerge on its own from a broad, kind of rather blunt opinion. But when you delve into it deeper, you can see that maybe Visser is the one playing further in the centre forward role more than Mbeumo. You see that actually at the start of a season, someone like Foden is probably going to start all 4 games just based on the history when you have that closer look. And that's the advantage of being able to have the opportunity to look for those things, right? And that can help you with your team.
Yeah, and these aren't season holders. City players other than Haaland just aren't that. There might be a defender who crops up who's like a mainstay in the back line, but there's no reason to think of these players as long-term purchases. It's just about capitalising on their spells in the team in good fixture runs. And we've seen in the past, Foden's gone on runs, Gundogan's gone on runs, Mahrez has gone on runs. And yeah, they don't last beyond 7 or 8 games, but it's just anticipating where those returns will have. Because the rest of the midfield and attack, Haaland's going to be there, Rashford's going to be there, Saka's going to stay there. They also got Mitoma, possibly, is going to stay there. We'll come on to that in a second. But, the back line's not going to change pretty much, barring injuries and suspension. So there is room, providing you're not booking in too many transfers and you haven't got too many, risks. I think there is early season room for 1 or 2 short-term holds, and by short-term I mean sort of 5 or 6 games rather than just like 1 or 2.
Yeah. Well, you made reference to the options that are available in midfield. There are a number of different price points that are very attractive, but also very flexible as well. And the reason you're able to do that, of course, is because at the current point in time, you don't have Mohamed Salah in your team. That is very common. So, for them, in terms of everybody else, you probably don't need to be too scared. But I suppose we know what he can do. That is Salah. And I imagine you don't necessarily think he's a bad player this season.
No.
But it's just about how he would fit into your team. Have you tried a Salah draft yet? What's your thinking there?
I haven't. I mean, he's the best midfielder in the game. Like, let's not get off on the wrong foot. I don't dislike him. At some point, he will come into my team. When the fixtures get better. Perhaps when we establish some new bargains for the season, there might be a new Mitoma of this season. There might be a new Almiron or budget defender who allows us to have that 2 premium setup. But I think balance is this squad just looks better balanced. Admittedly, I haven't tried much with Salah in it, but I've seen other people's drafts. There's plenty of RMTs on the message board at the moment. And it just loses something, I think, particularly when you're not captaining him. There'd be only really one game before the second international break, probably game week 2, where you'd even consider Salah, because the rest of the time it's going to be Haaland for those games I've just mentioned. Liverpool got Bournemouth at home in game week 2, so that is a bit of a worry. But apart from that, they're away to Chelsea, they're away to Newcastle. They played Villa, who are much improved now. They've got Spurs away, they've got Brighton away. Not the greatest run, I think, in 1 or 2 fixtures that Salah's going to be the top scoring premium of the week, no doubt about it. But if you're looking medium term and where that extra cash can be spent, then my thinking is a draft without him at the moment. Now, he may go absolutely crazy in pre-season and then ultimately thinking, but we may get an injury to Rashford or Saka or someone like that, and that will adjust our mindsets as well. But at the moment, I think I see too many upsides in spreading that cash around multiple 9-8 million midfielders rather than having Salah and lesser lights from a 6 million, 7 million pool.
Yeah,
but that could change.
That's the thing, really, is that while there could be a Salah bandwagon, there may well be 3 or 4 other bandwagons in the same price brackets of players you already have. And so shifting to 2 to 3, maybe 4 of those in the first 6 to 10 game weeks will probably have a better upside for your team in general. And I suppose because there's lots of people who don't have Salah, it does mean we don't quite have to be quite so scared of his effective ownership as well, because it isn't, when he does do well, it is just kind of, by the law of averages, kind of less likely to damage your rank as well. So that's quite useful, quite helpful for planning to go against him, because you don't have to compete with that captaincy except for really game week 2. But most of us like to roll a transfer going into that one anyway. So, if Salah scores a hat-trick game week 1, what's you thinking? Do you go for him or do you just hold your nerve?
Yeah, it's easy to see here and see I hold my nerve when I know myself I can be very weak-minded when it comes to early season bandwagon. Probably hold my nerve because it would just disrupt the entire structure of that team. He'd also have to be doing better than Haaland, I think, for him to even come back to the occasion. Because even if he does start in form, then he won't be handed the armband by me other than game week 2. So, I could lose one of the Arsenal mids and possibly lose Trent to get Salah in. So it might be Salah or Trent for that Liverpool slot. But yeah, I'd love to think I'd be strong enough to not disrupt my plans for just off the back of one performance. But we know Salah has and can punish people when he's overlooked.
It's almost as if he knows when he's been overlooked in FPL.
Yeah, yeah.
So
I remember I remember having a really good start to the season once. I was about 20,000 in the world, like with a wild card still to play, and I opted to get rid of Salah. It was the first time I'd ever not owned him in about 2 or 3 seasons, and then he scored a hat trick the following game. So
Was that away
I
at
am
Bournemouth?
charged still. It was away at Bournemouth. Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
I
imagine
remember that
the
weekend.
idiocy that went into selling him before Bournemouth. He then had a few trickier games after that, but that derailed my season somewhat. So he's definitely got it in his locker to do that again.
Yeah, I certainly remember there was very much a shadow hanging over the scout Slack that weekend. Don't talk to Neale. He sold Salah. So yeah, I'll never forget that one for sure. So yes, I know exactly what you mean. That could entirely happen, but fingers crossed we can all stay strong this year. That is what we hope for. Let's jump into the more specific areas of your team then, and let's start with an area that I actually find very fascinating. So I don't know if you share my enthusiasm for it. The goalkeeper position. You've got Flecken and
Yeah,
Areola at the moment. I'm very proud to see you are a fellow member of the Fleck Republic, as we are trying to coin that term and get it widespread, courtesy of Mark Jobling. So yes, what convinced you to join the Fleck Republic, and do you think you will stay in our lovely country?
well, yeah, it depends on David Raya, I suppose. If he's still there, which is the same thing happened last season. I think Strakosha was brought in, and folk thought that Raya might be on his way because I think he's got another year left of his contract. And there's talk of him heading for pastures new, but he's still there as we speak. The reason I've gone for Flecken is that Brentford, their ability to concede shots for goalkeepers to save, but at the same time, few big chances. So, shots that should be easy to save, and then their goalkeepers can rack up save points, is unparalleled. So they were, I've got it written down here, I think they were 19th in the division for shots on target conceded last season. That's relegation form, but fourth for big chances conceded. So they allowed a lots of long range speculative efforts that David Raya should be saving, and that's in turn build up his save points. That in turn build up his bonus points. So if it's just the goalkeeper that's changing, and you've still got that back line, it's been reinforced by Collins this summer. It's a solid unit that one of those teams that's better as a collective than they are individually. It's a system led thing where players can come in and out. I mean, Ben Mee came in, people thought he was past it, and he was absolutely excellent last season. They've got players like Norgard in front of the defence as well, who helps with that effort. When they're playing bigger teams, they often have like Janelt in there as well. So they've got a really solid base to start from. And yes, an inferior goalkeeper could slightly derail all that. We saw it to some extent when Rea was injured in that first season when Brentford came up. But Flecken sounds very much in the Rea mould. Like Mark did a scout report on him, and he's a ball playing distributor. He's I think he's a Dutch. Is he a Dutch international, or he's certainly under 21s? And he's got this very similar profile to David Raya, maybe slightly inferior in quality. Raya had like the best save percentage in the division last year, and good XGP as well. But I still think if Flecken comes in at 4.5, he's one of the leading lights. As much as anything else at the moment, there's just so much uncertainty in the goalkeeper position. So I did an article yesterday. It was on the best budget goalkeepers for FPL, and I listed, I think it was 12 or 11 teams who we think there will be a starting 4.5 goalkeeper, and there was only about 3 of them that we're absolutely sure about at the moment. So Neto, Pickford, and Leno. The rest of them, Brentford being one, Brighton, got Steele v Verbruggen. We don't know who's going to be the number one. Burnley's going to upgrade their keeper. Palace have got Johnson v Guaita. Johnson was playing towards the end of the season, but Guaita was number one originally before he got injured. Luton's going to buy a new goalkeeper. Forest are going to buy a new goalkeeper. Sheffield United might upgrade Foderingham, who's never played in the Premier League. There's talk that Areola might be the new West Ham number one. This has come from, I think, ex-West Ham employees. So there's so much uncertainty. We don't often get this at this time of year, but so much that could change between now and Game Week 1. Pre-season is going to be absolutely key for all these teams I've just mentioned, because in a month's time, or in 3 or 4 weeks' time, we're going to know probably who's going to be number one for most of these teams. There was just so much uncertainty at the moment. So if I'm just looking at underlying numbers based on last season and some decent early fixtures as well for Brentford, then I like the look of Flecken for certainly the first 8 game weeks or so at the minimum.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. The goalkeeper position this summer, I think it's very cyclical in the sense that I think we get a summer like this perhaps every 4 years, because that seems to be the average contract length these days. And so
Yeah,
then when it's a perfect storm, you just get so many expired contracts all happen at once, and everybody kind of plays like goalkeeper merry-go-round, and
yeah,
because even at some of the bigger clubs, like with De Gea at United as well, Spurs have got themselves a new goalkeeper as well, so it is very much a switcheroo. I suppose my question would be, if Raya does leave, would you be more tempted
yeah.
by the Flecken Strakosha double up? Because then you've guaranteed got the starting Brentford goalkeeper. You get to have the benefits of everything you've mentioned there, even in the event of an injury to one of them, or perhaps a dip in form for one of them as well. You've obviously got Areola as well. I mean, a starting 4 million goalie at West Ham would be quite nice, but my guess is that that's more just out of the fact that Areola could, in theory, be underpriced this season, rather than you being especially passionate about the West Ham defence.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that fixture run at the start is pretty bad as well. It's a sort of echoes of Danny Ward last season, when he established himself as a 4 million starter, but Leicester had that awful run of fixtures. So there's parallels there. I think Areola, this is at the time of recording, Areola and Bentley from Wolves, they're the sort of two great hopes, I think, from that 4 million bracket, who could possibly to start. And I do like having starting keepers from two different clubs, because I think previously, and we might not get this season, but when COVID hit, or when when there was the Queen's death, well, actually all the games were cancelled then, but something like that happens, and then you get a postponement. Then if you've got two goalkeepers from the same club, all of a sudden, you got no playing goalkeeper. So I like to have two separate playing goalkeepers. Ideally, it'd be great if one of them was 4 million. So I would stick with an Areola or a Bentley back up to Flecken, if either of those establish themselves as number ones. I probably won't rotate keepers. I mean, I did an article on that. There's a great way of covering Brentford's tough fixtures with Fulham's Burnt Leno, but you're paying 9 million for two goalkeepers, and personally, I haven't done that. And then with those two as well, they make a lot of saves. I think they were the top two for saves last season. So you never know when you're going to bench them at the wrong occasion. Raya could play away at Chelsea or wherever, and pick up 6-7 points just to saves and bonus, even if he doesn't keep a clean sheet. So I think that is fraught with risk, rotating keepers. But yeah, I think I would ideally like an Areola or a Bentley backing up Flecken.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I suppose other scenarios that could possibly happen, postponements due to
Yep.
weather, because of course global
Yep.
warming is
Yeah.
periodically getting worse, as we've been told. Of course, train strikes as well are continuing. I can think of a number of plans
Yeah.
I've had
Yeah.
to move because of the train strikes. So any of those number of things could happen. We've had, as you say, a very fraught number of years with those fixture postponements. So yeah, backing it up with a different team does make
Yeah.
a lot of sense for sure. Let's move into defence now. You sort of already talked about Trent a little bit. We've also got Estupiñán there, we've got Gabriel, we've got Reece James, and we've got Bayer at Burnley. So a broad spread of different price points there, and including a 4 million defender, who I think me and you are definitely excited to have at least three, we think, starting the season at that price. So,
Yeah.
but let's start with Trent. You've obviously had to pay 8 million. How locked in is he? How nervous are you about his price?
Yeah, it wasn't great, but I think for the good of the game, it was the right thing to do. You don't want to make him so cheap enough that he's just a essential for all teams. And I think looking at the moment, he's only the fourth most owned defender in the game, 33%. So yeah, 2/3 of managers don't actually own him. So I think that it is a nice decision to have. I think you want more of those types of 50-50 calls, rather than just a state the obvious template for me. At the moment, he's a lock, and the fixtures aren't ideal. I think especially if I'm going without Salah, he gives me an option of a game week 2 captaincy possibly. Not that I captain defenders very very often, but he's not a defender anymore, is he? He's been sent towards the end of the season. Now there is talk that the new centre mids coming in might persuade Klopp to go back to a more conventional 4-3-3. That was just one theory proposed by a number of people. However, if you just stick with that box setup, the 3-2-2-3 with Trent in midfield, then I think I still will prefer to stick with Trent. I think it's not even a contest at the moment, Trent v Robertson, because Robertson's tucking in to be their third centre half, just isn't getting forward as much. If they were both orthodox fullbacks again, then there's definitely a debate to be had. But yeah, Trent. I mean, in those final 9 game weeks where he was playing as a centre midfielder, he created 9 big chances. Now that's just in that short stretch of games, 9 games in as many game weeks. Only 3 defenders created more all season, so he was really churning out the underlying numbers, and I think 7 assists in that time as well. He was shooting from distance, still from distance, not too many shots in the box, I think just one. But he's an 8 million midfielder who gets you clean sheets, really, and sort of mid-price midfielder attack return. So I am fairly confident I'm going to be starting with him. I think as much as anything else as well, last season we can be lulled in a false sense of security or a false conclusion that last year is going to be the same as this year. So there was just a dearth of clean sheets last year. It was a really much not a year for defenders. We look back one previous year, we were all about defenders. We were all going to start with 5 at the back this time last year.
Yeah.
Everyone talking about big at the back and sacrificing players up front. Seasons just have their own narratives and trends. What happened last year is not going to necessarily happen this year. Liverpool are going to strengthen midfield. They already have. Chelsea, Man City are probably going to be defensively better as well, because it was just a freak occurrence last season that they didn't get. I think they got, was it 13 or 14 clean sheets? Normally they're up at 20, 21, and the underlying numbers weren't that much worse. It's just there happened to be so many occasions where they conceded one goal. An absolute ridiculous goal from long range. Demarai Gray came back one he scored against Man City out of nowhere. So I think you're going to get more. There's just as much chance of us getting more clean sheets and attacking returns from defenders this year as there is a continuation of what happened in 22-23. So I think to be prepared with a flexible lineup which can, mold in any shape you want. It can go to 5-3-2 or can go to 3-4-3. Just be prepared that it's not necessarily going to be the same as last year, and that's why I've got 4, mid-price or premium defenders. The most expensive of which is Trent.
Yeah. Well, actually, before we talk about everybody else, while I've got you on a video and have the opportunity to ask you, this is actually looking forward, right? If Trent continues to play the role that he's currently playing, do you think he would have to be classified as midfielder next year? I'm asking you to put your neck on the line to some extent, but I think that's the forgotten sort of knock-on effect here. So, in effect, could this be the last season that we get Trent actually as an FPL defender? Could very much have a little bit of a farewell campaign if we think that maybe next year he's a midfielder because of that position that he plays in that new system.
Yeah, it's tricky on this because I wrote an article about potential position changes before FPL was relaunched, and there was a separate section all about inverted fullbacks, which is what Trent is and what John Stones is doing now at City. So traditionally FPL have just concentrated on team sheets. So if you're starting at right back on a team sheet, you're a defender. If you're starting as a right winger in a front 3 on a team sheet, you're a midfielder. So it doesn't matter where you end up. It doesn't matter where your heat map is or how many touches in the box. Like Salah, his stats are ridiculous, but he's a right winger on a team sheet. So how do you describe Liverpool's formation on a team sheet? Do you draw it? Do you draw it as 4-3-3 because that's what it becomes off the ball, and therefore Trent is a right back, so he's still a defender? Do you draw it as we do now on the Scout Team News page as a 3-2-2-3 with Trent in midfield, because Liverpool spend more time on the ball in that shape than they do off it in a 4-3-3. So really, you probably should be a midfielder, based on that possession count and on the ball tactics. But I wouldn't like to be them this time next summer, because it will be a big call if we get a continuation of that, because this is probably the biggest tactical shift we've seen in many a year in the Premier League, and it'll cause them to scratch their heads a bit, I think, this time next summer.
It's certainly the biggest shift in general positional decisions, probably since 4-3-3 became so popular. In effect, you've got people who are playing as, in effect, inside forwards, still having to be considered as midfielders in the game, because obviously that's been the subject of debate for many, many years. That's probably the last time that we got that new thing come into it, because back in the old days when we were playing FPL, your front 3 would be like a Drogba, a Rooney, and like a Ronaldo or something, and they were centre forwards. That was it. That was kind of how we went, and we were very much big up top, and now we're big in midfield. now we've got these inverted fullbacks as well. It's going to be a challenge, as you say. I suppose they probably won't have that challenge about Reece James, who we expect to be more a traditional wing back this year. But traditionally, where I've seen Reece James in a defensive 3 or possibly even a defensive 4 in some people's teams, you've actually got him as your first sub, and you sort of mentioned there that there's a bit of a longer term plan with your defence. Having Gabriel, James, Estupiñán, and Alexander-Arnold. Yeah, I mean, so James on the bench, my guess at the moment, just because Liverpool first game week, hard game.
Yeah, precisely that. Yeah, just because of the fixture. Because beyond that, game weeks 2 to 8, it's absolutely brilliant. It's West Ham, Luton, Forest, Bournemouth, Villa. All right, that's not so easy. Fulham and Burnley after that. He's still one I'm wavering on because he has proven time and time again to be vulnerable to injuries. The good thing is this year is that Chelsea's out of Europe, and there isn't the 2 games a week pressure on those limbs and joints that there was before. Now he can still pull up with a muscle injury, of course he can, in any given game. But we do have Chilwell as well, who's similarly injury prone. I think it's just that the focus just being on purely on domestic matters. The new manager, Pochettino's history of attacking fullbacks. I think we had that season, didn't we? When was it Trippier and Davies? Was it? We've got 7 and 6 assists apiece.
Yeah.
He rotated a lot. He did rotate those 2 a lot, but they were in Europe at the time, so I think we'll see less of that, certainly at the start of the season. So the jury's still out a bit. There's such a big turnover of players. I'm loath to go too heavy on Chelsea at first, despite their good fixture run, because we just simply do not know how they're going to gel together. But I mean, Trent, James, and Estupiñán, which we'll come on in a second, they were both in the top 10 last season for minutes per chance created amongst defenders. James, I mean, the previous season, if you forget what happened last year, because Chelsea were just from front to back, they were awful. But just the previous year, he was second for minutes per expected assist and third for minutes per expected goal. So he had that dual threat. This is amongst defenders, by the way. He had that dual threat where he could get you an assist, but he could also get you a goal. Then he was obviously clean sheets on top of that. So historically, his underlying numbers have been great. Chelsea's as a collective suffered last year, but and it's just a bit, it's the same thing. It's the same thing we see every year with Reece James. If he can just stay fit, then 5.5 is a great price for him, especially with those early fixtures. Might even enter the penalty taking conversation. He was in the mix apparently, according to Graham Potter earlier this year. Now they've signed Nkunku since, so I'm expecting him to take the pens, but you never know. And they're part of the reason why I've got 4 decent defenders is because I know James is injury prone, that he can easily be a doubt 1 week with a hamstring problem, or ruled out for a longer period. So at least I have got 3 fairly attacking defenders, to compensate for that.
Yeah, and I suppose the thing about Estupiñán and I guess Gabriel with their prices is that they are to some extent benchable. So, for example, I didn't have Estupiñán in my initial draft because I'm kind of looking at Brighton initially as a bit of a short-term investment at the start of the season. Yeah. Their fixtures start to sour as Spurs and Chelsea's get a bit nicer, so it's potentially a placeholder. But then I just looked at Estupiñán's numbers again, you talked there as well, and his price, he's definitely benchable for some of those difficult fixtures. So if you had James and those other 3 at the start of the season in a 4-man rotation, do you envisage it being Estupiñán, Gabriel, for example, that you'd be subbing in or subbing out, I should say, for James, or would Visser enter that conversation being the cheaper of your forwards, for example? I just wondered where you felt that 4-man rotation might take your team in terms of rotating positions and lineups from 1 week to the next. Yeah,
I think quite a lot of the time I'll be playing 3 at the back, but Visser would definitely enter part of that. I mean, for example, I'll give a game week 5, so Brighton are away at Man United then. So Estupiñán will probably be benched. But on that day, on that game week, Chelsea's away at Bournemouth, so James can play then. Arsenal are away at Everton, so Gabriel's playing then, and then Liverpool's playing Wolves. So that's your 3-man backline sorted, and Estupiñán can be on the bench for that. So I'll have to obviously make longer term plans the closer we get to game week 1, but there was a little bit of that thinking further because Brighton's fixtures. Game week 5 is a tough one, and you can see it from game week 7 certainly. In between, I mean, I would definitely play him the first 3. I'd play him at home to Bournemouth in game week 6, even Newcastle in game week 4. I think fair enough. I think Brighton at home, you can get you an attacking return. The thing is with Brighton, after game week 5, it's not just the fixtures that turn sour; it's the European involvement. Is it the Europa League they're in? I think it is Europa League. That will kick in after game week 5, so they'll be playing twice a week. And we saw last season the carnage that unfolded in the run-in when De Zerbi had to play twice a week. There was so much rotation, not affecting Estepina, it should be said, but they must surely have to sign a backup left back this summer, playing twice a week. The hope would be that this new left back, whoever that may be, is the Europa League guy, and that De Zerbi fields a second string team on the continent. But regardless, I mean, Estepina could be surplus to requirements anyway from game week 7. When you have, if you've got Tottenham's run is about to start from that point, game week 8. So I'll have a good assessment period for likes of Porro or the new left back they've got. So yeah, as you said there, a shortish term investment, but he's good enough, as we saw away at Arsenal in the running, to get you an attacking return regardless of the fixture.
Yeah, it certainly makes a lot of sense when you talk about Europe as well. Like, oh man, the rotation for Brighton last year was really difficult, wasn't it? We've got Gabriel in there as well. I think we might talk about him when we talk about your Arsenal players, because that's very much a triple up. Because I obviously want to get your thoughts on Bayer as the 4 million. We've got Bell, Anderson possibly in the conversation as well at Luton. George Baldock at Sheffield United. It feels like 2019 all over again when we've got a 4 million Sheffield United defender, or we might even have it in Norrington Davis on the other side. So there's a wealth of choices here. So is Bayer simply just there as a placeholder? Do you think he's the best? Like, what's your thinking with the 4 million defender?
Yeah, he's placeholder for now. He's just, I think, the most secure at the moment. I think of the, and it's all promoted teams who are the playing options at the moment. There might be somebody who leaps out of the rest of the league as well, like Lamptey or someone like that, who becomes very obvious as pre-season goes on. But yeah, Bayer was like nailed for Burnley last season. As soon as he signed, they've made his move permanent this summer as well. I think he's called Beckenbayer was his nickname amongst the Burnley fans. He was, ball playing Colossus at the back. They have got a lot of centre halves, it must be said. They've got Ekdal, another guy whose name I can't remember. They signed Dara O'Shea as well from West Brom. They've got 4 potentially first choice centre halves, certainly 3. I think Ekdal and O'Shea. We think at the moment, and we talked to a Burnley fan about this for our promote series, we think Bayer's the nailed presence, and then there may be some rotation around him. Horses for courses selection. So that will be, my thinking at the moment. Bayer's the most nailed, but Luton's fixtures are better initially than Burnley's. They've got, I think, the top of our ticker actually for the first 9 game weeks. And you wouldn't want to be playing them because, it's all right having good fixtures, but is there as much faith in that Luton backline as there is in Burnley's, for example? I don't think there is. But as pre-season goes on, it could come Anderson, it could become Bell. I think there's Baldock as well at Sheffield United, as well as Norrington Davis, who I think's been injured for a long time. So it could become any one of those players. But I think I'll definitely have given the gift that FPL have given us this summer with all those 4 defenders, I think it would be daft not to have at least one of them in initially, at least while we suss out the landscape and assess whether defenders are going to make a bit of a comeback this year. I think until then, it makes sense to have one 4 million option. Because, as I said before, rotation just isn't happening as much in the first 4 or 5 game weeks. So you're not going to need a strong squad initially.
Yeah, it's very much about making sure that you've got as much money on the pitch as you possibly can, especially with that 5th defender for sure. So yeah, we'll very much see. And yeah, without wanting to just completely bash everybody over the head again, the correct answer to the 4 million defender question, we will probably know that come game week 1 because of that pre-season minute spreadsheet. So make sure you keep an eye on that. I promised us to talk about Arsenal, so let's have a look at that as a kind of triple up now, because I suppose there's decisions here for a lot of managers on. I've seen some teams with 3 Arsenal attackers, for example. You've decided to go with 2 midfielders, No Jesus and Gabriel, which is not actually the most common one I've seen. And again, it's quite differential. So yeah, Saka, Martinelli, Gabriel is your current triple up. Can you see that changing in any way? I suppose if that were to happen, if you were to get Jesus, that's a massive structural change, for example. So it's really, I guess, a question of maybe fixtures versus players and form and things like that, and structure as well, all rolled into one. So it's quite a broad subject, Arsenal, to talk about this season.
Yeah, it this definitely could change. So I think certainly one of them. So I think Martinelli's spot is the one that's up for grabs. I think Saka, I'm very keen on him from game week 1. I think especially Arsenal's got 4 home fixtures, I think, in the first 6, and he was massively better at home last season. I think he was amongst the top midfielders in the divisions for minutes per XG. I think it was Salah, Rashford, then Saka in home games. And there was a very compelling argument I saw someone make last season that as soon as Salah got injured, Saka just wasn't getting the ball as much because they had, I think, Holden coming in, and the pass map, the distribution map was all towards the left. It had changed, whereas Salah had been forming a nice little sort of triangle with White and Saka down that right. So I'm hoping with Salah being fit again, that sort of he sees more of the ball. But he's on pens. Arteta said as much, in even after he missed, he said he's going to physically come on the pitch and hand him the ball next time they get a penalty. And I think, as much as anything else, probably assured of minutes more than most of the Arsenal players. I think Odegaard you can put in Saka's club as well, but with Martinelli and with Jesus, I think as well, there is a risk, I think, of minutes. I think Trossard can play in either of those positions, and Ketty, of course, is relief from the bench. Havertz can, of course, as much as he's going to start, I think, on that Xhaka position, he can, moonlight as a striker when needed. So Martinelli's my concern at the moment. I would need to find 0.5, whatever I do. So if I'm going for Jesus, if I'm going for Odegaard's a 0.5 million upgrade in midfield. Jesus is the same price, but I'd probably be swapping Wissa for Mbeumo. So either way, I'd need, I think, 0.5 million generated to fit a different Arsenal attacker in over Martinelli. So where that would come from, I don't know. Maybe Fernandes instead of Rashford, which I'd not be keen on. And Sisu instead of Mitoma. Again, these are the compromises I spoke of at the start of the video, where you're trying to avoid those compromises as much as you can. Maybe City defender in for James, which wouldn't be that much of a compromise. So yeah, Martinelli's definitely the spot I'm not too sure of, because as we saw last season when Trossard came in, there was the minutes risk. Even if Martinelli was starting, he was coming off 60, 70 minutes, and he was watching the clock as soon as the second half started, knowing he was going to come off. So that was definitely the one up for grabs. I'm keen on Saka. I'm keen on Gabriel as well. I think I looked at Salah. Salah was in my draft originally. I think I sent over this morning. He was doing brilliantly. I think I did an article last week, which was it was based on this year's prices and last year's points to see who the best value players was. And Salah was the top value defender. However, Gabriel, I mean, he absolutely destroys him for goal threat. Salah scored twice last season. Gabriel scored 3 times, so it doesn't look that much difference. But I think he was shooting. Gabriel was shooting at like 4 times the rate of Salah. Like he had a minutes per chance of about 106, and Salah's was about 400. Yeah, he had 32 shots to Salah's 6, and even accounting for that spell when Salah was out the team injured, Gabriel was definitely the bigger goal threat from free kicks and corners. So I am keen on him, especially considering White is now 5.5. I think that's kind of made the decision for me. So yeah, Gabriel and Saka I think are nailed unless we see injuries and stuff in pre-season, and it's that Martinelli spot where there is definite room for change.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, he's certainly the one that everyone is most concerned about for sure. And I had him for a bit, and then as I sort of looked a little bit more into what you mentioned there about just the minutes threat, Saka became a lot more attractive, and I found 0.5 thankfully and was able to stick him in. But one interesting thing that you just said, actually not about Arsenal and that, is of course very much sort of kind of alluding to the idea that you think that going Fernandes over Rashford is a compromise that you don't really fancy, which I find very interesting, because that for some people is a big 50-50, but I suppose you perhaps already made your mind up.
Well, no, not necessarily. I think it's definitely more of a closer call than it was last season, obviously, with the price differences. Rashford's still going to pose the greater goal threat, and Fernandes is still going to be the arch creator. The concern, I think, is slightly over Mount. I mean, we saw Mount play deep yesterday, which hopefully is a sign that Bruno is still going to be the 10, or they're going to play with 2 Roman 8s, Mount and Fernandes. But then we saw Mount on some free kicks and corners yesterday against Leeds in the friendly. Is he going to eat into Bruno's set pieces? He was already sharing him or second in line behind Shaw for some of that. So, yeah, Bruno being on pens is definitely to his advantage. And you could easily fill your midfield with 4 pen takers, couldn't you? Or for even 5, you could have Saka, Mbeumo, Salah if you had the money, and Fernandes, and then I don't know, maybe like Gross or someone like that instead of Mitoma. You could just pack your midfield full of penalty takers. But yeah, there's definitely an argument to be had. I think until I've seen more of a Man United in pre-season, I think I'm definitely favouring Rashford. If it becomes apparent that Mount is going to be Eriksen and just sit deep, and Fernandes is still going to be unleashed further forward, then there's more of an argument to be had about saving that 0.5. But at the moment, I still prefer Rashford for that goal threat, which he definitely has more of compared to Fernandes. Looking at the shots and box, big chances and things like that. Even when he's not even playing up top, even when he's playing from that left, he's still prominent around that 12 to 18 yard mark. And I prefer goals over assists.
Yeah, well, absolutely. The extra point in midfield, especially, is for the goal versus, say, forwards goal as well, is big. I was actually having this conversation with Johnny earlier this week as well about him on the left hand side, and yeah, you're right. His ability to still offer serious goal threat, Rashford, on the left hand side is basically just because he's much better at facing goal. He's very good at making those penalty box entries. It's harder for defenders to really stop that in the same way that they could perhaps if he had to have his back to goal, maybe get bullied by defenders. So even if they do sign a centre forward, Rashford on the left is not to be sniffed at for sure. So yeah, make a good case there. And yeah, but you're right. Also, pre-season is going to help answer some of those questions. You've referenced Gross as a possibility as you could tell me the team. You've currently got Matoma there. How wedded are you to Matoma as the best Brighton? Is there the possibility you could be convinced to go Gross? Gross famously didn't make the Fantasy Football Scout Team of the Season nomination for the midfielders. McAllister, March, Matoma, all in. Gross scored more points than all three of them, didn't make it. So is he being slept on, do you think? And can you see yourself going with him between now and the start of the season?
I think the problem with Gross is that if he doesn't get penalties, which he might, thing is his record's very checkered in the past. I did it again an article last night. I'll point to this article on the site. It was going through all 20 teams that was going to be penalty takers this season, and there's a big gap at Brighton now because McAllister's left, but they've got loads of players who have taken penalties in the past. Estebinan's taken penalties for Ecuador at various levels. Ferguson's taken some under a 21 level as well. Milner, of course, is now with the club. I don't know how much game time he's going to get, but he's very prolific from the spot. Welbeck's taken some in the past, and Caesar's taken some in the past. Gilmore's taken 11 in his career. I don't know where. Scored 9 out of 11. So it's not a given that Gross gets penalties, and we're expecting him to be where he was last season, which is either in the double pivots alongside whoever replaces Caicedo, maybe Gilmore, or moonlighting at right back again. I mean, I'm not sure what they're going to do at right back this season. Even when Veltman was sort of half fit last year, De Zerbi still played Gross at right back for quite a lot of games. Even preferred him over Lamptey on some occasion. So the worry with Gross is a bit like McAllister last season. Is that you're never quite sure he's going to start. Even considering that, he still managed to get, what did he get? Attack returns. He got 9 goals and 8 assists, which is very good for what he started off at, which is 5.5. The reason he outscored all the other Brighton mids was more to do with the fact that he played every single game. I think he played 37 out of 38. So his points total was more than Mitoma, March, and McAllister, but points per match, he was behind the others. And Mitoma didn't come into the team really until sort of, what was it, game 9, 10 or something like that. It was later on in the season, and March had a long spell out injured. So points per match, assuming everyone stays fit, then Gross I think is still an inferior option if he's not on penalties. If he is on penalties, if we get a heads up on that, then I think there's the McAllister debate to be had all over again about playing from a deeper position but still having penalties in your locker. And in Gross's case, some free kicks and corners as well. March does take a few, but he could become like a Ward-Prowse. Not much threat from open play, but free kicks, corners, and potentially penalties in his locker. That is one of the talking points of pre-season, I think, who's going to inherit penalties at Brighton, because that could be the difference.
I tell you what, if I played for a team that was going to play Brighton in the pre-season, and I also had a fantasy Premier League team, I would be fouling their players in the box every 5 minutes just to find out who's taking the penalties. That would be so helpful. So yeah, fingers crossed on that front. I mean, it's crazy with Gross because actually, I was just having a look as well. 159 points. That is his second highest ever score in FPL. Just 5 points shy of his debut campaign, which of course was when he was in everybody's team for basically most of the campaign, and he probably made team of the season that year, is my guess. But yeah, just wasn't talked about all that much, and so that's just one of the things that it just makes me wonder if we're overlooking him. But you're right, it's all about those penalties, isn't it, for sure? So we will absolutely have to see. Well, we've kind of already talked about your forwards, and we've gone through all your midfielders, so it kind of just leaves us with one guy left to talk about, and that is Cameron Archer, sat there third on your bench. He seems to be emerging as the guy that everyone's got in that 4.5 slot. There is a lot of people, and people will be sick of me making this comment, who just pick their third striker based on whatever banter they can come up with. For example, the General has Plange so that he can take him. For example, what's your thinking behind Archer? I'm hoping there's some kind of great sitcom reference here or something, or is it simply just because he's the one everyone else has got, or maybe alphabetically he's the one that comes up first? I'm intrigued to see your thoughts there.
I'm a big fan of disgraced Tory peer Jeffrey Archer. No, not really. Yeah, I'll be honest. It was kind of just at first glance, it's where I thought the most likely minutes were going to come. But in actual fact, what I think you want for a 4.5 forward, especially if you're not playing, if he's like your third option, because you're going to have to get very, 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 very lucky to get someone who's going to contribute even bench appearances from 4.5, is to get the lowest own run, who isn't going to go down in price. So if for example, I think 11% have got Sam Surridge at the moment. So he's the most owned 4.5 forward. If the season starts and he's transferred elsewhere, or he gets injured, or he's just not playing, and people start offloading him, his price is more likely to probably come down if there's mass sales. If you've got someone like, I don't know, Taylor of Luton, who just isn't no one expecting any kind of appearances from him to start with, so he's not going to be sold by many players, then the price isn't as likely to drop. Now, I might have completely botched the FPL price algorithm there, but I think as often it pays to go with one of the least popular options in the 4.5 bracket if you're not planning to play them, just to avert the threat of a price drop. But Archer, I've been reading about him. I think Archer and Balogun could get loans elsewhere, or even permanent moves elsewhere. There's a talk that Archer could stay at Villa because they're obviously competing in the Conference League as well. So he could be the Europa Conference League starter and then contribute minutes from the bench to Watkins. Because as far as I'm aware, Villa haven't signed anybody else yet. They've got that young, is it John Duran, who really hasn't done much yet. They're really lacking in striking options. I'm not sure if they're planning to reinforce up top. But yeah, that 4.5 slot is, it could be anybody at the moment. Pre-season might tell us more.
Yeah.
The hope would be that one of these players gets maybe a Balogun goes to Fulham or West Ham or something like that. But then again, everyone's going to have him at that point. So it's probably the player we've finished on in this video, but it's the player I've put least input into in terms of thought process. Almost like a throwaway selection with Archer. And it's just purely based on playing 3-5-2 or 4-5-1 most weeks.
Yeah, I have to say, I do really wish that John Duran was 4.5, because then I would pick him just purely so I could just make Duran pumps. I just sit here and be like, let's save a prayer for whether or not he's going to play this week. It would just be an endless stream. But unfortunately, he's 5.0 million. So thanks for that, FPL. It's such a great opportunity for us to have some banter, but oh well. But yeah, I know what you mean. Like, everyone's going in on Sam Surridge, but that just seems like an accident waiting to happen, because none of these guys are going to play. There's no one we can really see who's going to play, and so when they don't play, that is just going to trigger sales. When people are, let's be honest, we're going to see people find they can't get to a third striker who perhaps starts well, and then they just ditch someone to upgrade that guy. It's just, you can see that coming. You can see that coming a mile off. So we just got to be careful, haven't we?
I'll briefly mention Corley Woodrow, because he played 27 times for Luton last season, but 22 of them I think were off the bench, and they have already signed another forward/winger, Ogbenny, I think, from Rotherham. So he might already be third or fourth in the pecking order there at Luton. But he might get you minutes off the bench, but I certainly wouldn't be putting hopes on him starting.
Yeah, that's the thing, is don't pin any hopes here. In fact, Joe even said on his video that he might as well just put his cat as the third 4.5 striker, because it doesn't matter. It literally is not going to matter who it is, as long as it's not someone who's going to drop in price. But yes, that's covered the whole of your team there, Neil. Thanks very much for talking us through it. There's lots of really interesting dynamics there. So it's very different to a lot of the drafts that I've seen so far, which is nice to see from the editor of Fantasy Football Scout as well, picking out some gems or some different ways of thinking about some of these positions. So yeah, thank you very much for helping us out there. I'm gonna bash everyone over the head one last time with that final call to make sure that you've signed up for Fantasy Football Scout membership, and you can get even more of Neil and Tom and Mark's thoughts in those membership articles as well. Now is the time to do it. 30% you can save on the pre-season prices, and you're going to get all manner of benefits from that. Don't also forget to like this video and subscribe to the Fantasy Football Scout YouTube channel. It costs you nothing, and it helps us know exactly what kind of content to make and to keep doing, and which content not to do, for example. So, it's a very useful litmus test of that. So make sure you do that. And of course, hit that bell notification as well, because that means you won't ever miss a piece of content between now and the start of the season. So with that, it's a goodbye from me. Have you got anything else to add, Neil?
I don't think so, David. Other than I'll see everybody closer to game week 1. We'll be probably in about 4 weeks today or tomorrow. We'll be doing the first team news video of the season. But yeah, we've got lots of more editorial stuff to come between now and then. Previews of all 20 clubs. We're going through the price list still. We've got scout reports, moving target articles, more pro pundits as well are coming back. I think Praz has got one coming out tomorrow as well. We've got Tom's 10 things to look out for in pre-season article will come tonight as well. So lots of good stuff to come in the weeks to come.
Yeah, I mean, that is the thing, is everybody is enjoying their summer. And maybe you are enjoying it as well, but you are very, very busy. So we have to be making sure that everybody is checking out that content, because they are working very hard on it, and it will be very, very useful. But yes, thanks very much for that, Neil. We shall leave you fine folks to enjoy the rest of your tinkering on your teams, and we will see you next time.